Thank you.
Well, coaches, thank you very much for joining us this morning. I'm on the beautiful New South Wales upper north coast, a place called Crescent Head, not far from Port Macquarie, having a few days, 3 days rest from not doing very much, apparently. Beautiful day here, which is why I've got a very loud, very annoying shirt today and not maybe my usual business attire. A very special session today with Professor David Pyne. I've had the great fortune of knowing David since the early 1990s and have had the great opportunity to work with him on deck, excuse me, working with him a range of situations in Australia and different parts of the world. I like to embarrass David as much as I can, that when you look at the performances of Australian swimming teams and coaches over the last 40 years, to be seriously, that it's often you'll think of the swimmers, you'll think of the coaches, you might think of the clubs, maybe some of the leaders. David's been in the background in so many of our great campaigns and the performances of athletes. And I think one of the most underrated influences that David has, because of his long association, not just with the Australian swim team, but his long time being at the Australian Institute of Sport, was his role as an educator, where coaches would come in at national team camps or other camps and have a chance to spend a bit of time with David on deck, in meetings, in consultations, in planning sessions, where David's influence may have been quite often subtle, but incredibly powerful and influential on the way they thought about training, periodization, planning, implementation of programs, reviewing and assessing the effectiveness of programs, work rates. There's so many things where David's been an incredible influence on the sport of swimming in Australia and different parts of the world for at least the last 40 years. So great honour today to introduce Professor David Pyne, and I'll let him take it from here. Thanks, mate.
Yeah, thanks, Wayne. Yeah, thanks for those kind words, and thanks for the invitation to join in this webinar discussion presentation this morning. So I'm speaking to you in my shed on the outskirts of Canberra, currently in the middle of renovations. So for those of you who've been through that, so at the moment we've got 2 plumbers and a builder here, and we've got an electrician and perhaps the tiler coming back a little later. So I've been scurried off to the garage. I've got the headphones on. So hopefully there's not too much background noise. So as Wayne mentioned, I'm really pleased to come in and speak today and share some of my experiences and perspectives with this group. And I looked through the names, 1 or 2 names I do know, Graham Moore, obviously, and I'm recognising there's some people from New Zealand swimming. But most importantly, there's a whole range of coaches who are really keen to be involved with the program and here today. So I've got about 20 slides. Notionally, we've got an hour or a little bit more if the questions continue. So I'm happy to take questions, and I think Wayne will be monitoring the chat function, and I'll take a few questions at the end. So we're trying to make this interactive and not just me carrying forward for that time. I do like this time of the year. It's early season training. So for us in Australia, New Zealand, Southern Hemisphere, spring. So, you know, coming out of the international season, there's always that break through September, and then it's down to business now. October, November are good background months. So I know there's been some World Cups on, and it's college season in the US, if you keep half an eye on what's happening over there. But for our programs down the Southern Hemisphere, it's in Australia, New Zealand, it's really just getting some good work in and leading into an Olympic year. So one thing Wayne and I have spoken a lot about the year for these sort of discussions is, I know the temptation is to be looking for sets and reps. And for many years, I've spoken at the Australian Swim Coaches Conference, which I've just done again in September on the Gold Coast, which was a good opportunity. So coaches always really keen and eager to hear and see what other coaches, particularly the top line, the national team, those with international success. And that's really interesting and informative. But it always comes with a proviso that obviously how you translate that or pick the eyes out of it and then use the information. So often we go there and there's people taking notes or getting copies of PowerPoint. So this one is a bit short on sets and reps. In fact, there aren't any. So what I'm doing here, as the title suggests, is around perspectives. So it's really a broad sweep through, I guess, my view and my experiences working with so many coaches and athletes and staff, as Wayne mentioned. So it's big picture stuff around sort of planning, about a system, about a model, terms we hear a lot about. So a bit short on detail, but hopefully it's something that resonates and might give you a different slant on things, and you can go away thinking about your own coaching program and take some of the ideas or insights that we can discuss today. So I want to start with some international and sort of set the scene, and then a little bit on planning and periodization, getting down to a bit more detail. So my background is as a swimming physiologist, and there's always this ongoing debate on the sports science. Are we specialists or generalists? So as things have gone on, there's a place, and I've got one slide just talking about, I guess there's quite a long list of areas of expertise, but I think I'm probably got a foot in both camps. I mean, certainly I'm a physiologist, or physiology and performance is the way I sort of badge myself. But, I think I've provided a lot of general support for coaches and worked alongside some fantastic coaches and some great staff, both physiology and other disciplines, and learn a lot from swimming. So you learn as you go. So I'll share you, there's just 3 or 4 slides on physiology. And then I want to finish just with some insights. And I've taken those from Warren Buffett. So it's a business model. And as you know, I'm sure you've all been to different sessions and you're looking at, the business world or the military world. We have close links here in defence. It's the military soldier and soldier performance. There's the business. So in any areas of high performance or excellence, there's the performing arts. So we've got a PhD student with us at the university who's an expert in ballet. She's a physiotherapist with the Queensland Ballet Company. So there's lots of ways you can look about achieving excellence in whatever pursuit it is. So I've just got 1 or 2 slides that sort of resonate with me, and I want to share those with you. So with no further ado, I shall push on. So it's really, I guess, this discussion today is about this intersection of coaching and sports science. So the medal-winning performances and swimmer success comes from the interaction of the coach and the swimmer, but the sports science can provide valuable support, primarily to the coach and the way things go. So this audience here is some coach educators in sports science. So obviously looking at the way that coaches and other support personnel can work together. But obviously it's involving and it's for the swimmer as well. So when you're working more with senior swimmers, then obviously they're in the conversation as well. And we can talk about that triad. It's the swimmer at the top of the triad with the coach and the sports scientist, or it's the athlete in the middle. And there's been lots of slogans and models, certainly in Australia, about an athlete-centered, coach-driven, supported program. So there's different ways you can conceptualize that, but at the end of the day, it's what happens in the training pool, in your programs that you're delivering, and the quality of those, and the responses and adaptations they get from the swimmers. And sports science plays a much smaller role in that, an important role, I think, if it works, if you get the right people together at the right time with a bit of support, then I think that's a win-win for all 3 parties: the athlete, the coach, and the sports science personnel. So that's the sort of the area we'll be exploring today. And at the end of the day, we want to get to the sharp end. So it's this one that we hear a lot about here in Australia. It's the winning points of difference. So if you go to a lot of programs, there's people in the water going up and down. At face value, perhaps there's not a lot of differentiation, but you've got to look more closely. And that's the art of coaching that comes in. So the work that you do as a coach. So it's it's the sets and reps, but it's your technical model and how you coach that, and the all-important interaction with the swimmers. So all those points that you deal with every day that you have to work with the swimmers in front of you. So again, I'll point to some of those points coming from the business setting and see if they resonate. That might be useful for you as we go forward. So big picture down, thinking now internationally, World Championships, and it's a pretty crazy schedule, as you know, if you follow these things closely, with World Championships coming thick and fast. Back when I started with Wayne and Graham, and maybe one or two of the older people here, they were 4 years apart. Then it went to 2 years. And for some reason, Pyne or World Aquatics now. So getting ready for February 24. So another World Championships, 6 months from the last one and 6 months out from Paris. So a bit of a scheduling challenge. And in terms of then programming for swimmers, that's thrown a lot of challenges up for everyone. And I think those fields will be a little bit thin. I'm sure there's some swimmers with an eye on, naturally enough, the Olympics more so than the World Championships. But there they are, they're the results. So you can only turn up and race who's there. And there are 18 countries that won medals. I just downloaded this from the World Aquatics website. It doesn't all fit on the page. But you can see, obviously, those leading nations, and they're fairly familiar names. So obviously, Australians celebrated some success there, which is ironic because it was 22 years since the last World Championships in Fukuoka, where Australia topped the gold medal count. But it's a similar scenario. The US had more total medals, and then there's always that interesting discussion in the media about what counts. But I think from most coaches and athletes, it's around wins and gold medals. So a great result for Australia. And so that's, again, all credit to our head coach and his staff, and the coaching staff, and then the individual coaches putting swimmers on that team, and then the team itself that came together for the staging camp and then executed very well. So the US have been the number one nation, forever and a day. So what is it about US swimming that can deliver? Historically been the number one nation for all those years. And again, you've probably read or had some discussions around critical success factors, at a country level. So thinking about Olympic swimming or World Championship swimming. So those top couple of nations, and China's had a bit of a roller coaster ride up and down, and then you get into some of those European nations. France has come back a little bit. It was pretty strong back in 2012, getting ready for the Olympics. GB has had a more successful reign this last 10 to 15 years, and Canada. But obviously the medal tally is sort of skewed, isn't it, to those top few nations, and then there's other nations down the list, including New Zealand, that might only have one or two swimmers with medal-winning performances, or perhaps a relay. So those things don't change too much. So Australia came out in number one, but I'm looking now at, so where do those performances come from? As I said, for me, it's home programs. So it's the work that goes on 48 weeks of the year, primarily, not exclusively, in home programs. So it's the home coach and the swimmer, doing those 8 to 10 sessions a week that can prepare the swimmers to deliver that performance. Now, there's other factors involved. Obviously, competition experience. So that's tough for us in Australia and New Zealand to get that level of competition. It's not a new thing. It's a perennial issue. So not only good training, but racing opportunities. So it's a bit of a challenge for us. It's a numbers game. So if you look at the populations, US, China, some of those other nations, much bigger than Australia, and certainly much bigger than New Zealand. So there's those factors, and then there's, I guess, the opportunity for coaches and swimmers to do that from a financial perspective. So there's not many swimmers who are paid to do that. I know in Australia, just a few of the top flight swimmers make some decent money, but most of them don't. And I'm sure that's the case around the nation. And then it's, I guess, the coaching fraternity. So, this group here. And so at the end of the day, it's the coaching group that got to deliver the programs, deliver the performances, set the swimmers up so they can execute. So coaches are really central in this process. And it's an interesting discussion around, certainly in Australia, perhaps in New Zealand and elsewhere, around the coaching voice. So as sports evolved and got more corporatized, would be one word, and more management driven. So there's a bit of an argument that the coaches have had less voice around the boardroom. So that's probably evident in Australia. And then there's all the business and the politics between Pyne as it was, or World Aquatics now, and the various coaching organisations, WSCA, the World Swimmers Coaches Association. So whether that's a local discussion or a national discussion or international discussion, so there's no easy gig with coaching. And certainly in Australia, we've got some very successful high-profile coaches, but not many of them are really in a position, relative to what we read about in other sports, thinking of the football codes and the money that goes around as well. So hard-earned, and every success that's gained is hard-earned and to be celebrated. So critical success factors, but I guess our theme today is looking at how we can assist the coaches, and that's, as Wayne said, been part of my role. So for many years, probably 30 years, I was a full-time sports physiologist, traveling with teams, working with swimming and doing a few other things, doing research and coach education. And more recent years, I've had a university role, but I'm still active. I was on deck last night with some of our Paralympic programs, and we've got some national camps coming up at the AIS here in Canberra. So still getting the gloves on there, Wayne and Graham, after all these years. So that's just the overview, but now just looking at the performances. And, when you come to these discussions, or we go to a national coaches conference, and we would hear from the best coaches, which is appropriate. So, they have the world every 4 years after the Olympics. So they have that quadrennial coach, and they celebrate the successes of Olympic gold medal coaches. Or you look at world championships. So obviously Australia, very successful. So Molly O'Callaghan, one of our breakthrough swimmers in 22, winning the world championship in 100 free, and then lo and behold, popping up again this year in Fukuoka, and breaking that long-standing record from the shiny suit period, so under 153. So fantastic. So all the credit to Molly and her coach, Dean Boxall. And certainly in Australian swimming, and maybe if you follow that closely, that's a picture of Molly from the actual meet, but that's a picture from Dean from the year before in Tokyo, where Ariana Titmus won her gold medal, beating Katie Ledecky. So that certainly was very publicised. So Dean had some fantastic results, world records. He had 10 swimmers on the team. So he's our standout, and coach of the year again this year, just recently at our coaching awards night. So all the credit to Dean and his staff, and to Molly. And then I'll just with an eye on the analysis. So, what are some takeout messages? And you can look at the video of the race, which somebody probably did. And then I'm just looking now from a performance physiology, conditioning, coaching point of view around those splits. And that's a role that I have done on the national team in years gone by. And there's lots of records, and this information is available almost in real time. So, you can, like I was, just had a meager timing running on the computer and watching races live on the TV. So you get to see what happens, and then you can, in your own time, you can dig down within 30 seconds. Results are up, and then you can download the PDFs and have a look at these results. So one of the things I've done a lot is looking at pacing. So that's an area of critical for coaching and racing. So getting a pacing profile. So every coach and swimmer preparing for a race, you've got to have an individual race model. So around pacing, and there's been a fair bit of sports science input into that. So for many years, all the races have been videoed, electronic timing results are there. And we've done some work around that with some of our students. So again, the interaction of the university and our postgraduate students. So I'll put a shout out to Katie McGibbon, who's now working on the Sunshine Coast with one of those Swimming Australia hubs and the Queensland Academy of Sport. Did her PhD, so I had some role in that, and we're looking at pacing profiles. So if you're looking at this, and again, the 200 swimmer 153, well, how do you do that? So it's obviously it's that first lap speed. So 26.9, if you look at the field, you've got to be out in 27 point to be competitive, this sort of top 8 and an A finalist. And the second lap there is that critical speed. So if you crunch enough of the numbers, it's that second lap speed. So it's the second 50 and the 200. or the second 100 and a 400 that sets the pattern. And that's related to reasons of energetics and hydrodynamics, because so fatigue obviously builds through the race, and the energetics, as you know, and the hydrodynamics is you can't suddenly increase power. So that second lap sets the pace, and then you're going to hold that. So for that third lap, so 29.0, 28.8, and then obviously it's the finishing lap. And again, if you look across all the events at the international level, you've got to have that. It's the last lap that often determines the outcome. So you've got to bring that home, and 28.1, and I think if you go and look at even the other place getters and the non-place getters in that race, there'd be a lot of 29s, maybe even a 30 point in there, be tailing off. And so based on some of the analysis we've done over the years, if you can get out fast enough, hold the speed in the mid-range, and then come home faster lap, then that's what the medalists do. So that's with thousands and thousands of races and looking at all the successful performances the last few years or 10 years or 20 years. So I think it's just one of those fundamental aspects of swimming performance about that race profile. Every now and again, there's a variation on that, but that's pretty much the standard model. So and that's what brought a 152.8. And then I'm thinking, okay, so back in Dean's program, so that's St. Peter's Western in Brisbane, Queensland. He's been there a few years now as head coach, and formerly he was the assistant coach to the legendary Michael Bowl, who's now down on the Gold Coast at Griffith University. And so they're two of our powerhouse coaches, and Vince Raleigh, who I worked with a few years ago, who's also in Brisbane. So as you know, in Australia, a lot of the concentration in that southeast Queensland corner. So I'm sort of thinking, well, and I'm sure if you spoke with Dean and those other coaches, they would have a model, and they're very experienced coaches. So this is probably almost instinctive for them. So it's all those 8 to 10 sessions a week for 48 weeks of the year to produce a performance like that. So there's a lot of work that goes in to preparing the swimmers, both with the technical aspects and obviously their training performance, their physiology, and then all the dry land. So some things we'll touch on as we go through. So you can watch all the race and celebrate or commiserate, and then you take a bit of a deep dive in. And then, so I'm thinking, okay, so what sort of sets would Molly be doing to produce a performance like that? And we've been following the World Cup, talking about Michael Bowl. So Kaylee McKeon, again, one of our leading Australian swimmers, Olympic champion backstroker, and pretty good medaling. So just on the World Cup circuit in Europe, and breaking 2 world records there, which is early season. This is spring training for a lot of people, but she's had a great year, and I know Michael pretty well, and so the level of detail in his program, and she's a swimmer with tremendous range. So Kaylee's got very impressive short speed, but great condition, and obviously the technical aspects. And then working with Michael, she was previously with Chris Mooney on the Sunshine Coast. So I'm interested in the interaction, and it's the people end of the business, and then it's getting down to sets and reps. But Michael, one of our leading lights, just covers everything. So he's one of the nicest people you could meet. Quite opposite in personality to Dean. So Dean's an extrovert, and Michael very quietly goes along, but very empathetic, and that coach from interaction allows the training to produce this sort of performance. So I think it's good to be a student of the sport and to take a bit of a dive into those medal-winning performances and a world record like that. So that's things have been happening this year. The other thing is there's been an ongoing debate. So if you're a bit of an online person and you're following these things in swimming, so with podcasts, YouTube, and the social media, and this is not a new thing. So in all the years I've been involved, it's what's the balance of training and, the proportion of race pace work. So no doubt race pace and fast quality work, is going to deliver some really good performances, but how much, what's the proportion? And that's just the perennial. There's no easy answer to that. But there's been another burst of, I guess, a focus on, well, how much aerobic training do we need to be doing to produce the performances? And if you're looking at those world-class swimmers, the quality of their training, and the technical, and then obviously the performance quality delivers the performance. But, you've got to put the work in, but how much work? So early season work, how much preparation work, as a younger swimmer coming through. And if they have a long career into their 20s, what sort of training are they doing at 21 relative to 17, relative to 13 years of age, or they stay on even to their late 20s, as can happen now. So we're thinking of Emma McKeon, again, another swimmer, Michael Bowl, training with. So this is a question that is a perennial question. But as is the want these days, these things get a life of their own. So this one sort of had another burst just in the last month or two. And so I know in Australian swimming and also through my network internationally. So this one was on the fly probably about 6 or 8 weeks ago. So with Brett Hawke, who has his podcast series. So Brett, the former Australian swimmer, but long-time resident in the US and a very successful coach at Auburn. And, had a lot of results with US and international swimmers. Cesar Cielo, the former world record holder, men's 100 free. And he's really now making a name with his podcast. And certainly I would recommend. So there's some fantastic coaches and discussions with coaches and with leading swimmers and then other swimming officials. So this is a picture of Dave Salo, so California US coach, pretty experienced, been around a long time, highly educated and had a lot of success in the early 90s, moving more to this sort of high intensity, so lower volume, higher intensity type work. And so Brett produced a video and a podcast, you can find those pretty easily online. And so this got a bit of a life of its own about aerobic training. It's overrated. And he had Michael Klim and Cam McAvoy. So Cam McAvoy, who won the 50 freestyle, so 29-year-old Australian swimmer, been around a long time on the national team. So, and then obviously Brett was a 100-meter freestyler himself. So the sort of the headline was running well over aerobic training is a bit overrated. And if you looked at the video, so this is a sort of a video filmed off the shoulder on deck, 14 minutes worth. So you can go and have a look. And I had a look at that, and Dave covers a whole wide range of topics and things. And so I think he's not actually saying, aerobic training is less valuable, but it has its place. And so, there's a place for, I guess, aerobic training and then race pace work, and obviously overspeed work, particularly if you're swimming the 50 and the 100. So all those elements that Dean Box will put in for Molly O'Callaghan or Michael Boyle would put in for Emma McKeon or Kaylee McEwen. So, I'm not certainly dismissing Dave. I've got a lot of respect for him and his programs. And so for these things get a life of their own. And so there was a lot of email traffic going around, and this actually came up the week before I spoke at our national coaches conference. So I just pinched this slide from there. So I just put that out there. Don't take everything, the lip service and drill down. So I think most coaches, understand that. So it's all around balance and that fine tuning, rather than going, oh my God, what I'm doing. So you take these things on board, but don't get derailed or distracted by that. But check out Brett's websites. I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff. And often it's just insights. Again, it's a bit like, I guess, what I'm covering today. It's more insights and perspectives rather than getting a lot of technical detail. But tap into that, but always be an intelligent consumer of social media. I'm not the first one to say that. So just a couple of slides. So as Wayne mentioned, I spent many years delivering this physiology talk for our coaching accreditation. So the bronze license, as it was, it's had a few different names. And so, David, could you come in? And I'm sure Graham probably did this as well. Just give us the physiology lecture, and they will be expecting, a whole lot of stuff on the energy systems. So I've just got this one slide, and, you've probably looked at this once, somewhere, and it's filed away. And obviously these things, it's just the general understanding. So a colleague of mine, a good colleague of mine, Tom van der Behade, who spent quite a few years in New Zealand from about 2006 through to 2013. Then he came over to Australia. He's in Canada now with Canadian swimming. So he actually did this lecture a few times. And then another colleague of mine, Bernard Savage, long-time physiologist with Swimming Australia. So we've all had a go at this. And it sits in the background. So not something I think that's front of mind for coaches, but I think it's just to have that understanding about the energy source for swimming. So there's a nice colour graph there around, the basic principles of the three systems. And the key points, as I've listed over there, around, there's a duration effect, obviously, the longer intervals and races, become more aerobic. But in swimming, you're going 100% intensity for the distance. So there's no easy races, whether you're even swimming at 50 or 100, 200, or out to 4, 8 or 15, or even 10K, if that's your thing. So it's the interaction of duration and intensity, but you're going as fast as you can for that distance. And then obviously that dictates the fuel source. So for the more explosive in the red, and obviously they're short sprints in training, or a 50 freestyle, then that's a creatine phosphate, the immediate energy source, which is rapidly deployed, rapidly depleted, and then rapidly repleted, within 30 to 60 seconds. That's the basis for interval training. And that's the sort of energetics of a 50 free. So the fuel source is important. And then obviously you get into where a lot of the swimming events are in the 100 and 200. So, that sort of minute to 2 minute barrier, which are the highly anaerobic. Well, the highly anaerobic, but actually they're probably fairly equal contributions from anaerobic and aerobic. So you can see there in that bottom right-hand corner, I've just got some percentage distributions. So, and I'm sure you've probably seen this in some form, going back to some of the classic textbooks in swimming, or some of the coach education material. So there's quite a wide variation in there. So I just, with all my experience, I went back and checked a few sources. And so I just came up with a bit of an estimate there around those contributions. But the principle there is even a 100-metre event has got a pretty substantial aerobic contribution. So the event itself, you're going to get to VO2 max by the 50. And so you are swimming, and generating energy through your aerobic system. But obviously it's highly anaerobic as well. So using your anaerobic glycolysis, producing the blood lactate. So, 100 free or form, over 47 or 46, if you're at the top shelf, through to the female breaststroke, 105s or 104s if you're trying to win there at the Olympics. So highly aerobic and anaerobic. So you spend a lot of time in training developing those systems. So from a physiology point of view, you're developing the anaerobic and the aerobic systems, but they're hard to measure. So the role of physiologists, we do a lot of indirect measures. So we can take blood lactate measurements fairly easy. Been doing that for a long time, and you can get an indication of blood lactate concentration, which is a pretty good measure of the involvement of the anaerobic system. And we can measure glucose as well. But around measuring the aerobic contribution, so that's the oxygen uptake, that's tough to measure in swimming. So we don't measure it in training or high performance programs, really. There's a dabble. These things go in cycles every few years. There's a bit of a dabble. So these are things that are done in the background in research settings. So I've had to dabble a few times over the years in Swimming Australia and a lot of other nations. So Europeans lead the way here. So there's been a lot of good work done over the years, the Netherlands and Germany, Spain, Portugal, and so on, and then bits and pieces in the US and in Australia, but none of it with the top swimmers or coaches. So things that we're getting a bit of a handle on. So I think we understand the principles here, and then coaches do this sort of instinctively, but they're not really talking a lot around glycolytic. And yes, the terminology just kills you, doesn't it? Like there's different terminology from coach to coach, scientist to scientist. So we don't want to get too wrapped up in that. And there's lots of variations on training classification systems that have evolved over the years. So that was my first foray into swimming over 30 years ago, working with Dick Telford, who I'm still involved with, Professor Dick Telford from the AIS, and he's a distance running coach, but had a pretty good involvement with swimming in the early days. So I think there's a lot of distractions there that coaches don't really need, but you've got to have a good understanding, or even the instinctive understanding about what's going on and the requirements for races, but then it's the requirements in training. So, and the other one there is recruitment. So, and that came up in Dave Salo's YouTube clip, in his conversations there, and with Brett Hawke. So it's the old muscle fiber, the fast twitch, slow twitch, which again, is a perennial discussion. And I did that in my undergraduate all those years ago, but it hasn't really advanced too far. I mean, there was some good work done about 4 or 5 years ago. It was an international collaboration between the Dutch and the Australians on the Gold Coast that actually took some muscle fiber samples from some of the top swimmers. This is on the Gold Coast again, and looking at what's the proportion of fast twitch or slow twitch. And so there's information again, if any of you want to follow that line, if you get into some of the science, you can reach out to the sports science fraternity. But I don't think it's a big driver personally. I mean, I think the other things are the key things, is the performance levers that you've got as a coach. So around, the prescription of training around duration and intensity of the intervals, and then what fuel sources you're drawing on that you need, the repletion rates of those. And muscle fiber recruitment is sort of in the mix, but it's not something you can change too much. The other things you can manipulate. So control the controllables and just know what you're doing with the other things. So, so that's my one little slide summary. They're the things you need to know. So it's around performance metrics for the coach, and then the underpinning sort of principles and regulation, but not getting too tied up in the specific numbers around percentage contributions. So just to wrap up this first section, so some key thoughts from me. So who have we got here? So it's the coach swim interactions. So it's Erica, so the bronze medalist from Fukuoka, her coach Lars. And Erica, I'm sure, will be now gearing up for Paris. Had the pleasure to have Erica over in Canberra for a couple of short training camps at the start of the year, and super impressive in training. So no surprises, international medal, and a very keen coach. So Lars, and working with the coach, I'm working with Shannon Rollison, so Olympic gold medal winning coach based here in Canberra. And I think there's a chance they might be back again later in our summer, so I'll be able to catch up with Lars and Eric a lot to look forward to. But obviously, the second man there has been in the news, unfortunately. So Lewis and Gary Hollywood. So for me, it's all around these. Started with the coach swimmer interactions. It's just the pair, and that's what delivers the medals. So all this other stuff is just good insights. But the model that these guys have worked to. So obviously that's very recent news. So I swapped emails with Gary Hollywood through the week, so he's still pretty bent out of shape, and so it's pretty unfortunate. So I was thinking about in my comments. So New Zealand sport and swimming and science and academia is first class. So, but obviously there's limitations there in terms of numbers and perhaps support, and those guys just got the pool pulled from beneath them. And I was talking with Gary last year, he'd been having issues with pool access. So for you coaches, you probably had to deal with this at some point or another. Lane space, costs, ownership. It's an everyday conversation here in Australia. And the number of pools disappearing. I mean, I like tap into some of my GB contacts as well. Same thing over there. So pool spaces at a premium. You don't control that. Now it's the big organisations, and Wayne and I have spoken about that a lot as well. So not ideal 9 months before the Olympics. So Gary's going to have to sit tight, and then Lewis will be taking some new steps in Auckland, and then hopefully he can get that sorted pretty soon. And there's still a good time. He's got a good background now, so if he can get himself set up and get some good work in, he probably wouldn't have missed too much time. But yeah, heartbreaking for their relationship that they've had there. And then on the bottom, Kyle Chalmers. So obviously a very successful Australian sprint freestyler, have sort of fell into an Olympic gold medal at age 18. Fantastic for him and his coach, Peter Bishop, based in Adelaide, supported by the South Australian Sports Institute. Bit of a roller coaster ride, some health issues, performance issues. He's had his battles at the international level, with the US and Popovici, and but he's had some success more recently, and swimming both in relay individual events, and pretty motivated now for his third Olympics in Paris. And he gets a lot of assistance, him and his coach, from my colleague Jamie Stanley. I do like to recognise, it's again that triangle, as I said. Coach on one side, sports science doing their bit, and then the swimmer, or whether you go with the concentric rings and the swimmer in the middle. So you pick your own model, but these people play important roles. And if you spoke with Peter Bishops, that's Kyle's coach, I'm sure he would acknowledge the contribution he gets from a whole range of support staff. And Jamie, who's a bit of a whiz over there in Adelaide, has done that. So, as I said, it's not about sets and reps. So I'm looking here. So this is just Australia and New Zealand. So I'm thinking about the great work those partnerships have produced. And I mentioned about Michael Bowl and Dean Boxall and Vince Raleigh in Australia, Peter Bishop, and then the respective head coaches. And New Zealand Swimming's got a new head coach. So things keep changing. And Rowan Taylor has been very successful at the last Olympics and the last two Worlds. So he'll take our Aussie team in and working closely with the coach. And the other coach I should mention there is Lee Nugent, twice Olympic coach in 2004 and 2012, and now as a mentor coach to Rowan, and still on the deck working with emerging coaches. And I'll be catching up with Lee actually next week and doing a camp with him, a breaststroke camp in Canberra before Christmas. So it's great to be working with the best coaches. So certainly I would interact with the coaches you've got in New Zealand. And if you get the opportunity, people are only an email away. I tell this to my students at the university. So everyone's contactable now, more or less. Sometimes people don't answer and everyone's busy. But you should reach out to coaches in your area, where you coach in your program. Obviously, that's the everyday interaction, but, certainly coaches within New Zealand or in Australia, I think there's close cooperation there. But any coach, any ones we've mentioned today, or any of the names, I've got a list of names at the very end. A lot of talk about moving more from the sort of the immediate coaching programming is that strategic approach. And it goes on the Olympic cycle. So, you've got a high-performing swimmer, make a national youth team. Then they're on that march. The next step is, getting on senior teams, and then obviously a world champs or Olympic team. So all that takes time. Shannon Rollison says it's a long journey for the swimmer and the coach, and then support staff as me. I mean, I've done a lot of Olympic cycles now, and everyone's exciting. I mean, I was there for a few of them, but now I'm a background sort of person. But it's built around that quadrennium planning, but it's sort of been thrown out this time with all those world championships. So swimming, the calendar and I guess the challenges do keep evolving, but it's really about having a strategic approach, because you can get lost in the detail, but it's really having a good sense of where you are. And I think, coaches naturally have got that in their head. It's the session they've got in front of them, but they're knowing where they're going for the season. That's probably mostly front of mind. And then probably that longer term planning. Swimmers have a very short term approach. They're just thinking what they're going to do today. Really. And then obviously ones that are in the line for thinking Olympics or international, the top team swimmers, probably thinking a bit more about where they're going. But that's certainly something that you've got to get across, I think. So it's horses for courses there. And that's, discussions. There's a lot of discussions on deck or the coffee shop or in meetings, and just having a view on that. So a bit like sets and reps, it's down to how the individual coaches run with that. And it's a bit the same with the strategic planning. And that can be for an individual swimmer, or obviously for your group or program, club or squad. History and opportunity. So, what are the expectations for next year? Well, it'll be US, and they always come back hard. If you look at the international swimming, and I think from Australian perspective, we always do really well at the Worlds before the Olympics. So we go back in time. And then sometimes there's a bit of a stumble. So for us, we never swim our best in Europe. So, we did well at the last Olympics, Japan, similar time zone for Australia and New Zealand, like 1 or 2 hours, 3 hours difference. And we can get there in 7 or 8 hours. But Europe's always a challenge, it's the other side of the world for Aussies and Kiwis. So there's a bit of history there. So now we've got to, what changes are we going to make, or what things are we going to put in place and implement that? So what are the opportunities from a national team point of view? But it's all around the opportunity when it comes down to for the individual coach and swimmers. So again, that partnership and the work that's going on now to prepare them for that opportunity. And whilst it is a long journey, sometimes those opportunities just pop up, a bit like Kyle. So Kyle Chalmers, no one knew who he was, and he won the Olympic gold in 100 free as a pretty unheralded 18, which is unusual. Normally, they're a little bit older. But the swimmers can come through pretty quickly. So, first time Olympics, you can get up and medal. And there's been a lot of analysis done on that. And, there's a lot of swimmers, the top swimmers can come back for a second or a third, occasionally in Olympics. But opportunities are there for the taking, I think. So, you don't want to get ahead of yourself and bypass opportunities, so short-term racing or training, or these opportunities like today. So, the program has been put on, and the system that you've got, there's opportunities arising. Access to expertise. So I'm going to move on to, I guess, setting up how you can access expertise. And again, I worked for many years at the AIS. Australia's got a well-supported nation. We've got resources and personnel that New Zealand doesn't have, and probably most other nations don't have. So we're mindful and we respect that. But I think there's some things there that we can look at even in smaller club programs with pretty little financial resource. So it's networking and people thing, which probably a lot of you have probably already are doing or touched on. And then obviously it's just the way that you work, collaboration and coordination, both within programs. So you and your head coach, you and your management staff, pool staff, pool management and so on. And then working with New Zealand Swimming, High Performance Sports New Zealand, so all those things. So it's all around just people. And, we've got quite different coaching personalities. I go back to Dean Boxall, who, is real extrovert, and then Michael Bowl, so, quite opposite. So, it's all around personalities and sometimes local politics, but, you've just got to get in and make that work. That's, again, the art of coaching and how you get things set up around that. So just moving through now, as I said, embarrassment of riches as to what Australia has. And swimming's not a rich sport. So, and again, we've had these discussions. And I don't know what Swimming Australia's high performance budget is. I mean, a few years ago, it was around about 14 million, but they've had a lot of financial sponsor issues. So I think the bucket is been a bit depleted. And if you look at, say, in Australian sport, it's the football stuff. So a lot of the leading Australian teams in the NRL and in the AFL have bigger budgets than Swimming Australia. And then you think about US sports. So I gave a talk a few years over in Portugal to their Olympic committee. And so I put up some figures. And if you look at like the US sport, it's just mind-boggling. I mean, you can't even get your head wrapped around the money in those professional leagues, the NBA and the Major League, or in European in football and in soccer. So you've just got to pick your mark and run with what you've got. So we do get really good support in Australia. So the Australian system, it keeps evolving now. It's got the hub system. So it's got the different hubs. So there's a Brisbane hub, a Gold Coast hub, and a Sunshine hub. And there's a small Canberra hub. And then, we've got support in, obviously, the other cities in Melbourne, Sydney. Two bigger cities, but they don't produce many swimmers. It's another ongoing discussion in Australia. So a lot of our stuff is concentrated, but our three hubs and the QIS that Graham worked with all those years ago is doing a lot of this frontline delivery, but a lot of the delivery actually comes from local providers. So it's swimming club programs and coaches who are still relying on their local GP or their local physio or a local massage. So not many of our swimmers get these things provided. So if you do, the top national programs do, but it's a pretty small number really. So it's then local coaches using local network. And I know Wayne's talked about this on and off for many years. So you've got to be opportunistic, that word again, and reaching out into the local community. And the other element there is the university sector. So there's lots of students going through exercise and sports science looking for work-based learning. And so you can get students to come in. Now, obviously, they're early career, so they may not have a lot of experience and knowledge, but they're keen to get in. And obviously now with accreditation processes, they've got to get their hours up there's a bit of incentive for them to do it, to get their accreditation, certainly in our system here in Australia and elsewhere. So that's another source of a spare pair of hands. And I think one of the really good ways to doing it is actually have a more experienced person, if they're available, and then coupled with an understudy. So I've done a lot of that. I've done a lot of stacker mentoring, which has been fantastic for me. The way you learn is to teach, and I've never been a lecturer. I've been a researcher and a sports scientist, but I've done a lot of mentoring and supervision, and I've learned as much, and you hear that a lot, but I think it's true. So I've learned a lot from coaches, but I've learned a lot in imparting my knowledge and experience to up and coming staff. And then it's just a little bit about how it works out with the coach. So it's just all those personal interaction. Can you develop a rapport with the coach? A bit like a coach-swimmer interaction, just how that relationship evolves. So I've seen some students come in, shake the hands of the coach, and that's probably the end of it. And then they'll just do their bits and pieces, and then they'll walk out, and then they'll come back when they've got to do more filming or whatever it is. So there's very little interaction or rapport on that. But I've gone to the other end. I've seen coaches, and I ring Vince Rally's way of doing this. And he's been in teaching as a teacher by profession for many years in high school. So he understands the learning and teaching side of it. And so I've seen him grab a student coming in, give him a stopwatch and put them on a lane. I'm going, well, that's probably a bit quicker than what we were hoping for. So I think it's just opportunities there, and just got to play it a bit by ear. So you're probably unlikely to have direct access to sports science, but you can reach out into the local community, and then you might be able to do some deals, and then you can reach out to your local university. That list there is a bit what we've provided in Australia to our swimming programs. Some of those are private providers, so all the sports medicine is private provision. A lot of the physio is. The S&C comes through our high performance network in part. The physiology is driven through the Swimming Australia system. So is the performance analysis. The psych is primarily private practitioner. Nutrition's half and half. So we've just got to put together, using our resources to make it happen. So we do have good resources, but it comes down to each of those hubs. There'll be a head coach, and then they work with their program manager there to put all this in place. So big change for us after the last Olympics, and they reinvented the system again, which they do periodically. So it took quite a while to bed down, but now we've sort of got a good system going through to next year. So one of the things is how you make use of your resources as a coach. And this is the thing that we talk a bit from the academic side, and these are terms we all hear. Oh, yeah, we want a multidisciplinary approach, because you're going to need those things. You're going to need physio, you need some S&C, you probably need some massage, you'll need a little bit of some sports dietitian or sports nutrition. But then it's trying to avoid the old operating in silos, which is, been the cliche done to death. So I sort of shy away when I hear that. But it probably still happens. So people come and deliver their piece and then walk out. But the reality is you've got to get people to work together. So you have these team meetings, which again happens in our national system. Maybe not so much at Clubland. People just shuffle in, deliver their service and shuffle out. And the coach has got to make all this happen. So the coach is the driver of the multidisciplinary arrangements that you put in place using all those various service providers or sports science medicine people. So that's been around for a long time. I mean, our system has evolved over the last 30 years, since, it's been great for my career to be working in a multidisciplinary environment. So I learned from those other support people, but it gets coach driven again. So over time, we worked out there's some natural alliances. So that's where you get in this interdisciplinary approach. And in swimming, it's S&C and physio is one really strong interdisciplinary connection. So I've seen that a lot over the years. So I've worked with some really good swimming physiotherapists and S&C coaches who do a lot in swimming. So there's a lot of work. The S&C coach and the physio can come to the pool, have a look what's going up and down. You just can't do it from the clinic or the gym. So you've got to encourage people to come and get on the deck and see things in real world. And then you get the physio into the gym, and then you can get the S&C coach into the clinic. So I've seen that work very well. And you do need to do that because you can give exercises in the clinic in a rehab or prehab, but then it's what exercises are occurring in the gym, and then it's the coach who's got to get that translation, working with the physio and the S&C coach. And it's probably good to have a conversation early on, so just to get people together and sort that out. And obviously people come and go as well. So these things just naturally evolve, but I think you've got to be proactive. And that's what the most successful coaches are. They've got a good feel for that. So you don't want endless meetings and endless paperwork. And that's the challenge of our system if it's over-managed and over-bureaucratized. And we learned that from the Canadians and the Brits, actually. So, there's lots of team meetings and processes and paperwork, but, you just cut through that and you make it work with people, I think. And then more recently, and again, coming from academia, and that's all fine, but we're always challenged, well, what's the value of all this work you guys do in the university? There's research projects, and coaches are a bit wary because they've been burnt too many times. So this term's now sort of been bandied around transdisciplinary, and that's collaboration again between the various disciplines, generate knowledge and create solutions. So it's not just getting in and doing a whole bunch of work. You're trying to create solution to what the coach's requirements are. So I don't know, that's I often say about problem solving, but it's all about performance enhancement. How do you get the swimmers to go faster? And so some key words there around innovation, cooperation, and intentionality, which I think is a good word. So things are done for a purpose. So the mantra now in swimming in Australia is purposeful design. So they've embraced that. So it's from the CEO down, the two coaches I mentioned, so Lee Nugent, Rowan Taylor's national head coach, and my colleague Greg Shaw, who's now the acting high performance director, and then down to obviously working with the coaches, national team coaches, and the providers. It's purposeful design. So that's instinctive with coaches, but that's the sort of the mindset you've got to have, that these things just don't happen. There's no happenstance to win a medal at the Olympics. It's got to be planned, and it's got to be ironclad commitment, no compromises. You've got high expectations. So those coaches that keep winning, like the Michael Bowles and Dean Boxall now, why do they keep winning? Well, they're all over this, and there's different ways to describe this concept. But that to me is, they've got the knowledge and experience, but they're on top of these things around innovating, always trying to find, those small improvements, the cooperation, interaction with the swimmer first and foremost. But these things just don't happen. So sometimes it's, on the periphery, I hope to make the team. I'd like to make a final. It'd be fantastic if I win something. And probably 95%. But the medalists and the gold medal winners at the Olympics, they've just got that innate commitment and belief to get that done. So some thoughts that I've seen over the period. I don't want to dwell on this too much, but this is something that New Zealand swimming and Australian swimming would do. So you sort of would do this in your program, at a simple level, but this is sort of, now things have got more organised. So there's processes around this and just making sure people know what's going on. So we have an induction program for our new staff. So we're always bringing in new people. They know what their role is, role clarity, responsibility. Whilst there might be a specialist, when you're on the team, there's a bigger obligation. You're there to provide what's needed to be provided. So you don't just come in, deliver your service and disappear out the door. You're there to be part of the team, to build that culture, that environment. So you've got to go, and not everyone gets that. We've had some pretty clever people come in, the world's best data analysts, and they can talk to a laptop, but not to anybody else. So you've got to be a team player in there. But we do have other outside consultants. So you get some specialist people who might just come in and deliver a service. So they don't do that team thing. And often, you're the sports science would be the interface with that external consultant. So that's something that happens from time to time. And we look at outside models. We develop our own model, for the Australian system. And so everyone looks at what the US do or what Australia might do, or, other well-resourced stations like GB. So that's all well and good. The grass is always green on the other side of the fence. But I would just look at what you're doing, in your pool, in your region, and obviously within New Zealand. So they're things that occupy a fair bit of time for New Zealand swimming, swimming Australia. But it's just, again, common sense approach there. So I'll put this model up for our students. So this is saying, well, what's the impact and the value of this work. So we're going to engage support staff, but then I flip it the other way. This is what you do as a coach as well. So it's a similar sort of model, implementing coaching programs to deliver a result, or implementing a sports science service, or maybe it's conducting a research project. And so there's that sort of standard progression there. So you're formulating your season plans as a coach, and then you're probably doing some more detailed plan, all logistics, lane space programs, writing workouts, getting assistant coaches, managing parents and managers. Research is sort of pilot testing, but you do a lot of pilot testing with sets. You're doing a lot of your key sets time and time again to refine them and make them better. And at the end of the day, it's about the quality execution of your programs. So the best swimmers are the best trainers, mostly. I did a lot of work with Alex Popov and Gennady Turetsky, back in the 90s, so the 5-time Olympic gold medalist. And I reckon his hit rate was about 95%. So what he was asked to do in training, he did to a very high standard, about 95% of the time. Another swimmer's, pretty committed, national team swimmers, and they try hard, but maybe they're at 85 to 90. And other swimmers, and you've probably got those in your program, talented, but a bit lazy, a bit distracted, and they might be at 80%. But the best swimmers, in that top shelf, mostly is always an exception or two. About reporting and feedback from a sports science point of view. So what are you guys doing there? And reporting back to the coach and swimmer. And that's got to be real-time feedback. So one of the things I tell the sports science is you never come in and test swimmers and then walk out. So, and not depending on what you're doing, but you want to be providing some feedback. And often on the pool deck, there's an opportunity to do that, sometimes even within sessions, and there's now technology that can do that, with wearables and laptops and digital technology. And often after the session, you can then download things or look at graphs and heart rates. We can get some blood lactate measures. You can review video footage. So I place a lot of importance on that, and I work that out with the coach. So sometimes with a set, there's no opportunity. If it's a short rest set, well, you just collect the data and you let the dust settle, and then you review that. And I work that out early on with coaches. So some coaches, they're very happy and welcome, walk along with them side by side and give some feedback, and others don't want to be distracted. So that's something I tell the junior sports scientists to work out. So I often give them the heads up about feedback. There's real-time feedback. There's feedback after, so at the end of either the set or sometimes the end of the session. And then it's the next day feedback. So you collect a lot of data. And I've always worked on this overnight theory. So if I do up a report on a session, I might be doing the evening session, so I'm at the pool, 4 to 6, whatever it might be. And there's a bit of evening homework for me, and I want to get those results back by the next morning to the coach, sometimes that night, so I can turn it around before the swimmers hit the water, but certainly by the next morning. So it's an overnight turnaround, because the timeless of the feedback's important for the coach. No use 3 days later or a week later. So I've set myself pretty high standard on that. I know other scientists have done the same, but I've seen too many slippage there, where people are busy and everyone's busy doing stuff, and then, I'll get to that, and suddenly it's the end of the week. And so the value has gone out. So I'd say for coaches, you're following sort of similar plan there as what the scientists do. But you work out what your requirements are and communicate with people working, your assistant coaches or any support staff that you've got, and work that out to your requirements. Again, just this interface about, what I advise the other scientists, junior sports scientists and swimmers. And also another thing I've done is a lot of research in IJSPP. So I had an opportunity early in my career to get in as an editor, associate editor for a journal. And this is a journal of sports physiology and performance. And it's interesting, the sports sciences, a lot of it's pivoted to health. So in the big wide world of academic research, and now courses, exercise and sports science courses, when I did it, it was 80% sport, 20% health. Now it's the other way. So if you go in any of the universities, if you look at the course that they do, high performance sport, is pretty minimal. And I think it's gone away from that. And other people are saying the same thing. So certainly in Australia, not sure about New Zealand. So we've got to work hard to educate our sports science people around sports physiology performance. And so these things, knowledge is easy to get these days. So, you can just get online and download that, get access to that. So knowledge and information is perhaps too much, it's just a flood of knowledge. But it's all around what you do. It's the critical thinking. And so you get that by tapping into that and sharing, thinking about that, and then engaging. So again, it's the sports science and the coach, or sports science with other students, or sports science with their academic supervisors, or it's that cross-discipline, interdisciplinary approach. So sharing those understandings, it's the coffee shop discussion, it's the on-deck discussion, and engagement. So whatever your role is in high performance sport, here we're talking mainly coaching, but also support staff as well. So critical insights, come from interaction, and then you've got to do something around it. So there's a lot of good ideas, but what's implemented? So that requires the idea in the first place, and then a discussion around how it might be implemented. So another long-time colleague of mine is Patrick Hunt, who's one of the leading basketball coach by profession, but he's been a long-time coach educator here in Australia. And so he talks about that. So when he gives a talk or a seminar like we're doing today, he'd say, coaches, I want you to go away from this session and implement one thing you've heard today. Do that tomorrow. And then another idea, I want you to go away and think about it and implement it next month. And another idea that you've got, thought, that's really good. I want to find out a bit more about that. That you might need to go away and do some homework on, or you might be an equipment thing, or it might be to get access to a personnel. It might take you a few months. I can't do that right now. I'm in the middle of the season. So that's something to implement in the next season. So he challenges the coaches to go away, and then he might break them up and say, all right, just come up with 3 things you're going to do. So something tomorrow, something in a month, and something next season. And then he'll often do a follow-up. So then if he's back the next year, he'll go and go, okay, so pull up your little sheet of paper, and would you go around the room and just say, okay, well, how did we go? Did you implement those things? So implement ideas, and words are cheap, but implementation is key. And then it's the impact. So okay, well, what works? And that's the things, if it doesn't work or it's not valuable, well, you move on, or you might review why that was. Maybe it didn't work the first time. So that's impact in terms of performances, but other ways you might get feedback on its value. So sometimes that's verbal, it might be your eyes. So it's all your skills as a coach. So we're evidence-based, performance-driven, but you've got to bank your insights in your instincts as well. So a couple of just summary points there. I think it's around sharing the vision. This group, through this program you guys are doing now, it's whatever your model or program or framework, that's up to you. So that's all customized. And then it's a long-term commitment. I guess you guys are committed because you're here on this program. It is a long journey. Hopefully you get a long journey in swimming and can be a career coach. And you'll go through lots of relationships, and you use those relationships to deliver the performances that we all want, and around roles, and it said collaboration and interaction. So a lot of words there, but that's sort of things I've learned mainly through experience. As I mentioned, just want to quickly walk through slides, and this sort of follows on from those points. So it's around deck support. So the deck is our environment that we work with in high performance swimming. So I spend a lot of time on deck. I know some sports scientists, again, in other places, I've had the opportunity, perhaps the privilege, to spend a lot of time. So that's been great, I think, for me, and hopefully I provided some good things for coaches and athletes. But a lot of people don't have the opportunity because they've got to work with 4 different sports. But it's a bit limiting if you only turn up once a month. So I encourage people to turn up when they don't have to turn up, which means mornings. So I know there's always the friendly banter that we've had, coaches in the morning and sports science turn-ups in the afternoon. So I'd say to people, well, get there in the morning or get there for a weekend meet. So don't just turn up when you're programmed or scheduled to come in. And coaches really appreciate that. You come with a coffee and get a few brownie points. The classification of training, so I said, there's been a lot of systems out there. So if you have a system, that's great. And now we have our athlete management system. So coaches, and this has been going around for 10 years, are required to log their training. And the system's pretty clunky, still evolving. A lot of coaches don't like it. Athletes don't really buy into filling in a lot of their daily questionnaires as well. So there's a bit of a compliance thing there. I'd say most coaches have a system in their head. rather than a UBIT shiny sports science classification system. So if it works for you, but you need to be sort of pretty rigorous about how you go around to prescribe your training. Evaluation of performance, the metrics are, what you see, it's around your tools, a stopwatch in your eyes. So, but sometimes you've got to drill down to the factors that contribute to performance that we've sort of touched on today. And while it mainly happens on the deck, I think you can look at some lab or clinic support if you've got access to that. A lot probably don't have the opportunity, but occasionally you're going to send people off for massage or the physio clinic, and you can go along with them, or you can get to the gym or sometimes the sports science lab. And then we provide other support. That's what I'm doing now, sharing some of my experience here in a coach discussion, or I could talk with swimmers as well. So there's lots of ways you can share experiences on the deck, but elsewhere as well. And so I spent a lot of time doing lactate curves. So I mentioned there's Alex Popov. That's one from back, in the 90s. Some salivary immune testing, and it was great to work with him and Gennady, the late Gennady Tereski, and Michael Phelps. 23 Olympic gold medals. Bob Bowman, a pretty celebrated career. So obviously he had access to some sports science. So he's getting some lactate testing there. So I've done a lot of deck work to generate a lot of these sort of things, but it's the conversations and the feedback that really deliver the value. Just one slide. If I was doing my 1 hour session, I'd have a couple of slides on each. But you've got to be across these things. This is sort of terminology. So, macrocycle, meso, microcycle. So you can, Google these things up. You can get textbooks. So some of the seminal textbooks around on swimming. The principles of training, so around progression, recovery, periodization. So a lot of these are stylized in textbooks. So you look at that and then you work that up. On the left, bottom left there's the annual plan. So there was a big push on those. That's the Canadian stuff, that came through in the 80s and 90s. So that was a wash. Some coaches still do that. I think that can be really useful if it's your thing. So, some coaches aren't keyboard coaches. So I would say, there's these things out there that can be useful. But if they're mandated, some coaches will push back. So if it's not your thing, then you move forward. But I think these things are good to have an understanding of, and then you can dictate how much you drill down. Just one, I guess, is things on what's cyclical around reverse periodization. So again, when Graham was still in Australia working with the Queensland coaches, and his successor, a guy called Tim Kerrison, who had a long career in GB and cycling with Team Sky and rowing, cycling and swimming, a really smart guy, clever guy. So these things are around, and I mentioned Shannon Rollison from that period as well. So it's really, and it had a life, everyone's on about reverse periodization, but it's just good coaching. It's just keeping a bit of speed in their early season. So we know no one coaches like it's the 1980s, where you're going 100K a week early in the season. So that's a good history lesson. So you want good balance in your programs from week 1 of the season. So it's early season now, October, November. So and swimmers are building their fitness, but you want to have good speed in there. So that's what good coaches do. So there's the terminology in there. So I'm not going to go through that. There's information around on that. And I've got my email at the end. I've written a bit of on those sort of things. So, terminology varies, but there's some good sort of principles there that you can look at, but it's good quality work. So you need good speed. You never want to bury the swimmers for too long. You need to challenge them to exhaustion, but you've got to keep them moving forward. So a balance of speed work all the way through, and it'll get sharper and more concentrated as you get closer to competition. So there's some real basic concepts out there. Have those conversations and reach out and share that with others. Just one slide on what we're doing in Australia. Lots of different things. So we don't have mandated tests. So back in Wayne and Graham and my era, working with head coach Don Talbot, these things were mandated. The 5x200 and 7x200, and Bob Trefine, the late Bob Trefine, who was our leading swimming sights there for many years. So we've done those in our youth program. We're still doing some of those test sets, the 450s on 2. holding pace. There's the various progressive incremental step tests. Did one of those last night, the 10-100s. So one of our para swimmers, one of our para medalist swimmers, getting ready for Paris next year. So horses for courses, and other nations have done this as well. And so other coaches come up with their own customized version, which is a bit maddening from a collation point of view, because it's trying to compare apples and oranges. So you've got to be systematic. If you're in a prescribed program with New Zealand Swimming, then you've got to sort of join the queue. And it's as important to standardise. If you're on playing Lone Ranger at home, then you can pick and choose. But you've got to be consistent and stick with something for a season and follow it through, and then see how it works and maybe modify it. Some international stuff. Jan Albrecht, who's done a lot of work coming out of Europe. So he's a self-styled swimming consultant, working with the Dutch, the Belgians and the Germans. So, and that's a paid consultancy. He does some work here in Australia, been a lot of discussion in Australia. It's all sort of commercial in confidence. So it's a little bit of black box stuff. So there's things done commercially that you can tap into, and Inside is another commercial group. So Swiss, German, and I've got a bit of involvement with them as well. So now you can get in and subscribe and get, as a paid subscriber, access, and a lot of it's done digitally as well, based on some pool testing. And VLA Max, so there are these different terms. Aerobic capacity, as I mentioned before, was a research tool, and one that's getting a lot of prominence both in Australia and the UK, and now Whisker, the World Swimming Coaches, have adopted this, supporting it. Is the 12-25 tests, which again is probably another discussion another day. But out of that, you get both anaerobic measures, but also a measure of critical speed, which you can use for aerobic training. But you have your own test sets. So these you can look at, and again, just reach out to your scientists, but being systematic, from a sports science point of view. And so again, we can look at, what those different tests are and where they fit in to the paradigm, or on those energy systems. So what I showed you at the start around, VO2 max, lactate tolerance, but it's a performance model that coaches use. So maximal speed. So what's your race model? What are your training progressions, with all your various sets? So some of these you can see are training-based assessments in the pool, and some of these are the best feedback you get from racing. So your local meets, regional, nationals, and obviously on the international circuit. So it's just having the insight to fit all that together and not get distracted. So a lot of detail, but just reach out. People have those. So I just wanted to finish, Wayne, on these winning points of difference. So I mentioned the business model there. So Berkshire Hathaway, if you're into sort of investments and look at your money, they're pretty famous names. Warren Buffett and his assistant. So Warren Buffett since 1965, and Charlie's been his assistant since 1978. And you can look up how much money that is in terms of billions. But these are business points. And so I said before, we can look at these sort of things. And I like reading these things, and you just reflect back on your own situation. So I'll just quickly walk through those and just make a brief comment. So this is coming from Charlie, and obviously reflecting Warren Buffett's insights as well. Knowing what you don't know is more useful than being brilliant. Yeah, I think that's true, isn't it? So you got to keep learning a lot of things you do know. When you've been around for a long time, you learn a lot of things, but you got to have that inquiring mind, and just knowing where you are, I think, is important for coaches and scientists. A majority of life's errors are caused by forgetting what one's really trying to do. So it's big picture stuff. So where am I in this preparation? So it's November the 8th. What am I doing today, this week, this month? Where am I going? Sometimes things go off the rails a little bit, and mostly that's at a swimmer end. It's a swimmer's struggle. But occasionally you're just second guessing yourself, in terms of your programming, the coaching, and maybe it's from a business sense or a coaching sense or just a workout sense. So you do hit a few hurdles along the way. So you just got to take a step back and see, what the big picture is. Mimicking the herd invites regression to the mean. That's true. And that's hard to avoid in life and in pursuits. So I see that all the time, and it's hard. We're all probably a bit tempted by that. So everyone jumps on board the latest and greatest. So yeah, I think you got to, and I'm always a second generation, like with digital technology. I'm not a first generation adopter, so I'm not a geek, which I think is probably good things because other people can sort out the issues. To get what you want, you have to deserve what you want. Yeah, probably. I mean, you've got to put the work in, so things don't fall into your lap. So, and that's both from a swimmer, you've got to put the time in, and coach, and certainly I've recognised that in my own career as well. The fundamental algorithm of life is repeat what works. Well, that's true. So successful models, those coaches, and you could small advancements and tweaks. So the fundamentals, they're the key things that you keep working on those. For those who keep learning or keep rising, yeah, learning's lifelong. Yeah, we've heard that a lot, but I think it's true. And that's what I'm doing. I said before, I might be learning more from today than some of you. Just me going through this and trying to put my stuff together. So keep trying to work on those things. You don't have to be brilliant, only a little bit wiser than other guys on average for a long time. I like that one. So, yeah, I wasn't the top shelf, never have been in terms of academic brilliance. So I've had a great opportunity and done some really good things. But I'm not the sharpest tool in the kit by any means. So a little bit streetwiser, and I've stuck at it. So that's worked for me. The best thing a human being can do is help another human being. Well, that's what coaches do. You're taking another human forward to achieve excellence. So, you know, it's a pretty grand plan you guys are on. We insist a lot of time being available almost every day. So just sit and think. Well, actually, I think that one, I'll probably put a red line through. Yeah, everyone's busy. Kids are busy, coaches are busy, staff are busy. It's a busy world. So I think if you can grab any time just to sit and reflect, that's good. Wayne goes fishing pretty regularly. He's got 6 rods in the garage. So he's down on the coast now. Look out. You must know the big ideas and the big disciplines and use them routinely. Yeah, that's true. So what are the big rocks? You can chase those 1%ers, but you've got to have the big things in place. So I'm the first to have said that. So just in closing, I've got a list of blue and red. So the blue are the coaches. Some of those are just Australian only names. Some of those are international. So the Sweetnams and the Talbots, Gennady Turetsky, and some of those are the coach educators. Some of those are sports science. I've got there in the red. So colleagues, some of those have come and gone. Others I stay in contact with, and some I'm still interacting with. So to all those, and some of those were mentors in my early years, and now I've sort of, in passage of time, doing that for mentoring new people coming through. And no doubt it's all, you know, for and with the many swimmers and coaches. So there's my address. I've got a few minutes for any questions here, but if you want to reach out to me, you can I do respond via email, because some people don't, but I encourage you to reach out to any one on this group. You should be doing that, but anyone in international swimming, and I'm certainly happy to do that. So with that, Wayne, I might pass back to you, and thanks very much for your attention.
Thanks, David. Sorry, a little bit of sore throat. Thanks very much for sharing a lifetime of experience, which has not just been influential in the sport through the 80s, 90s, but the fact that you're still on deck even as late as yesterday and working with gold medal winning coach Shannon Rowlandson and different groups continuously, and committing to ongoing learning is a real tribute to you as a professional. I'll just open it up to if Erica is still on. Erica, you had a question about sports science.
Yes. Sorry, turn on that. I'm based in the UK, so it's relatively dark, so I might not be able to see me in there. But thank you so much.
There you are. You're coming to light.
Yeah. Fantastic talk. Thank you so much. And before I go, I just need to let Wayne and David know that I met Jodie Cossar like a few weeks ago, and she said say hello to you both. Before I just forget doing it. So my question is about one of the slides that you share. 11, I think. Sorry, just go back to my comments. So implementing sports science that you actually share, that's kind of from the formulation to down to the review. That's kind of one direction type of like arrow down. But I wonder, this is supposed to be some kind of circular, so going back to the review, like feedback and everything that receives going kind of feedback to a little bit more like formulation, so that you can actually like what we can learn, what we had learned from the feedback to formulation, what can be done, the new kind of formulation kind of circle, or is it kind of, it's more one direction down in that slide?
Yeah, no, that's a really perceptive insight. So that's a sort of simplistic model with that progression. but it's iterative. So you'll go around at each of those steps. Would be some consultation and review as you're going along. So yeah, it might have conveyed the wrong impression that it's one directional. So each of those steps. So I think it's that everyday interaction. And I know, no one wants meetings. So often you might have a planning meeting, and then you might have the end of season review, which happens at the top level. But on the deck, it's the everyday thing. So we just do those as we go. So that's the everyday interaction. So it's not a set and forget model. And I know, reading some of the literature around, this 360-degree evaluation, so in the business setting and academia. So I think that definitely applies here as well. And certainly, I said with senior swimmers, they've got to be involved in the conversation as well. So it might be a little sort of concentric circle. So down that line, but at each step, you're reviewing and revising and taking corrective actions as you go along. So it's not a set and forget plan by any means. So Wayne, were there other questions just on the chat? I mean, I was sort of carrying forward there, but I know maybe if you could just check through that and help me if there's any questions there.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks, Erica. Hopefully I'll get to see you soon. Question from Raphael on workouts and fatigue.
Well, fatigue's an everyday thing, isn't it? So yeah, you don't want to be avoiding fatigue. And so obviously, swimmers got to get in and get that work done. So it's not too many where you got light session after light session. So one of the lines I've heard is, fatigue is a daily occurrence. And at some point there'll be heavy fatigue. So in your season, you'll plan some weeks where you're really going to load them up. And that might be through more aerobic type work, or maybe mid to late season, you're probably going to put in some quality race pace work. So I think that's an everyday occurrence, and that will vary a little bit depending on the season and the goal and so on. And then part of it is getting that level of fitness. So aerobic fitness promotes recovery. So again, I think that's another reason why you need a balanced program. You can't just do short sprints. So, that's going back right to the start, with the Dave Salo, the Brett Hawke, the ultra short race pace training. There's been various programs put out there. Some people have tried those, but you do need some general fitness in there. So definitely want to overload the swimmers, but short-term overload and then recovery. And working with Gennady Turetsky and Popov, so he had a great model for how to do that. So at select points in the season, he would go for definite overload where he'd do 2 to 3 quality sessions back to back. A lot of people do the hard easy. So Monday morning aerobic, Monday afternoon, bit of pace work, Tuesday morning kick, and so on. So you do your 3 or 4 quality sets. And so mostly the weeks do look something like that if you're doing 8 to 10 sessions a week. But Gennady had a great way, strategic points, just 2 or 3 times a year, where he would do back-to-back quality sessions to really impose an overload, to get that fatigue and the super compensation. So there's a lot wrapped up on that, but I think the swimmers got to deal with fatigue, on a regular basis.
Thanks, David. Thanks, David. Got a question from, do you want to take a couple more questions, Gary? Or
yeah, sure.
Wayne, I just see that I don't know if it's coming up on your screen, but I've got Dave and Richard have both got their hands raised. I don't think they've put it in the chat, but I think they've both got questions to ask.
Yeah, I can see that. So who wants to go first? You just open up your mic and fire away.
I'll go.
Hi. Oh, we both done it. Dave, you're on.
Dave, do you want to go first? You're on my top left corner, so that gives you priority.
Rock, paper, scissors. Okay. Yeah, you mentioned obviously a lot about top level coaches, Olympics, etc. And I think you said it is a 48-week program or a 2-year program. I can't remember. 8 to 9 sessions that delivers a performance. But surely, really, it's a 16-year program, isn't it? Surely it starts at age 4 with the swim schools, standard swimming teaching, relationship with pool providers, swim schools, the clubs. I mean, your diagram or your slide there showed that Australia, and their medal tally. Well, Australia's got a third of the population of the UK, and yet they outperformed, UK by miles at the Worlds. So surely it can't be a pure numbers game.
No, otherwise India would be the leader there.
Exactly. Yeah. So has any analysis been done on the methods of swimming teaching at early ages, early years, age groups coaching, or what appears to work in swimmer retention, parental support to young athletes, safeguards against overtraining and dropout? Has any analysis been done between countries?
Oh, there's quite a body of evidence. So that's not an area that I would claim to be an authority on.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's a lot of expertise in here. So yeah, definitely, if you're looking at that longer time frame, then it's back to learn to swim, and the club programs. So, and the critical work, which I think we all acknowledge, that goes on there. There's a lot of challenges in around that. I'm going to talk a bit about pool access for the top age group swimmers and the seniors and the elites. And obviously, learn to swim is the money maker.
Sorry,
so
there's problem of access to lower use.
That's right. So there's a whole lot of things set up in there around learn to swim and coach, and Wayne is in that area now. Is his day job as well as his coach education job. And I guess my sort of perspectives are more sort of in that high performance window. And there's been a lot done on early specialisation. So again, there's experts in that sort of athlete development area, and looking at early versus late specialisation. But in swimming, generally you've got to be in that early period. So it's not something where you can start swimming, in your mid-teens and do all that. So in terms of that longer progression, definitely there's a whole lot of discussion around learn to swim, and then progressions into club programs, squads, club programs, and then into your age group programs and how you progress those. And then obviously all the challenges that you face as a pool operator or a coach, and how you set all those things up. So I definitely recognise, they're critical factors as well. Thanks for that. So Richard, you had a question?
Hi, David. I'm quite interested in the energy systems and how coaches train them, and the sports scientist's understanding of whether those energy systems, the durations that you mentioned in your slide, how set in stone they are. So as you coach within an energy system, are you trying to extend the duration of the energy system or improve the performance within that particular energy system? Say, as you move from ATP into anaerobic, is every swimmer going to move at the same time? And then sort of what metrics you have to understand your percentage improvement. I know you've talked a lot about lactate. Are there other options there?
Yeah, I think from a coaching perspective, as I said, it's eyes and stopwatch, and that's you're coming down from a performance perspective. That's the reality of coaching, and that's the reality for the sports science to get in. Like, it's no point in me interpreting a blood lactate measurement. I've got to see what the swim is that's produced that or generated that lactate. So it's a top down from a performance model. And I know over all the years, you're looking at the quality of the swimming performance, and I'm looking at that from a sort of performance physiological perspective. And I don't claim to be an expert coach or a biomechanist. So I leave that to this group of coaches around, technical aspects of what happens from the technique. But I look at, pace. So pace and performance, and then work with the coach to interpret if I'm getting heart rate, lactate, maybe some stroke characteristics, and then make some inferences based on that. So that's the working model. It's interesting. I'm doing some work now in Australia with the QIS and the VIS down in Melbourne, and we've taken some blood measurements, and we're looking at metabolomics. So lactate been around for 30, 40 years. It's one measure. So now with medical technology, we can take the same amount of blood, a droplet of blood, and we can get 200 metabolites. So 200 different, and that's like not only like lactate, but all the glucose, all the anaerobic enzymes, all the lipid parameters as well. So it's early work, but the results are pointing to a convergence. So even though we might think short sprints are alactic, and then repeat pace 50s is highly anaerobic, and if you're doing steady state 400s, it's aerobic. But it looks like, and again, this is probably people's experience as well, it's actually a convergence. So even short speed work will require aerobic contribution, and even a short sprint will generate lactate as well. So it's really all energy systems are engaged. So I know I've had to sort of check my thinking over the years, and even up to this season now. So you want to avoid the simplistic thing, that's a short sprint, that's going to be the creatine phosphate system, and this is all around lactate, and they're just going up and down and producing using lipids. So I would say the 2 points there are, one, it's a top-down model from swimming performance using a stopwatch and the swimmer's progression, because that will dictate what they should be doing and where they get to. And then you're thinking about the physiological underpinnings. And so some coaches would do that explicitly, some instinctively, and that's the role of people like Graham Moore and me and Wayne and other staff to do, okay, what's going on there with the energy systems? And then I'm sort of challenging myself to think, now, what's really going on? And I think it's not just the simple put things in a box. It's really a spectrum of paces and a spectrum of energy contribution. So some people say, well, of course, it always has been, but I'm still getting insights as to the clarity on that. So the answer is top down with a stopwatch, and then just being aware that you can't easily put things in boxes, and it's really around proportions of different types of training and the underpinning physiology, and then the nutrition that supports that would be the way I'd think about it.
Just out of interest, if you take a number of elite swimmers with very similar lactate profiles going through similar training programs and you test through the season, do those profiles continue to map up, or would you find that the swimmers diverge on their lactate profiles as they progress through the season?
Yeah, the biggest difference is actually the individual nature. So, you might have like a 50% variation. Obviously, it's different strokes, male, female. But even if you put all the male freestylers together, you would find quite a wide variation. And it might be something like 30 to 50% variation in their lactate velocity curve. So there's a lot of things. There's muscle fiber, there's body size, there's all those different building blocks. So blood lactate varies a lot. And I had one slide there showing different lactate velocity curves. Whereas performance, you're only getting a variation of probably 2 to 4%. So if you time trial someone, so from when they're unfit to fit in training, there might only be 2, 3, 4%. So if you time trial someone now and then you put them up again next March or April or June, whenever nationals, age nationals or senior nationals are, their time trial is only a couple % different. So to me, that says lactate is a lot of variability, and you're really concentrating on an individualized program. So you can't take one person's lactates and apply it to someone else, and other measures as well. So lactate does vary a lot, and heart rate's another one. If you've done a bit of heart rate monitoring, some people have high heart rates, some people have low heart rates, and then the variation, and that's a bit of a fitness thing, but there's a lot of the individual physiology. So definitely you need to be working at that level with your top swimmers. If you're really gearing up someone for national and international success, you've got to look at them as an individual.
Thank you.
So any other questions in the chat there, Wayne? Just to cover, I know we're...
Yeah, I think we might just take the one, looking at the order of the questions. All right, one was from Jeremy, just said both you and I had mentioned the level of detail included in Michael Bowl. I raised with the group at the last session, we did a very brief synopsis of what I saw Bowley present in the Sweetenham session on the Gold Coast. And what I said, the words I used were the level of coaching of Bowley's at. The words that come to mind are deliberate, purposeful, specific, and accurate. That it's not 10 100s on 140 and let's just hope for the best. The level of detail in terms of stroke dynamics and splits, relative and specific to the event that they're targeting at the next competition, was mind-blowing. And that even though he'd been in the industry since he produced a guy called Glenn Hausman, as you know, in the 80s to break the world record for 1500, even though it wasn't ratified. And he continues to improve and evolve as a coach. So the question was, did we have any specific examples? I haven't got any right in front of me, but did you have any comment about that level of precision, detail and accuracy that we're seeing in the elite level coaches?
Yeah, so Wayne, you and I have done the tag team thing for many years, probably too many years. So I know you roll me out as the understated sports scientist, and you're more the showman, the front man, and you use the term mind-blowing. I have to put myself out on a limb and just say, yeah, no, that was just exceptional. Just to see that level of detail and hear him explain both the technical aspects, the quality of the work, this is Kaylee set before the World Championships. So just from how fast she was going, and the quality and just the construction of the set, and then talking about how he actually implemented it on the deck. So in terms of the principles, there you go. No, they're all the things that you'd need. But, you know, and I've seen a lot of swimming, as you have, and many people here that have been around a lot. Yeah, that was super impressive. And so you think, well, how do you swim 152.8 for 200 free? Or how do you go 203, 200 backstroke? And, you know, swimmers are probably thinking that as well. So I'm thinking that. And it's achievable, it's doable. So, and we've got some great examples. So that's the first thing, it's to open up that perspective that it can be done. And then it's how you go about it. It's a long journey, easy to say. And then it's having good programs, that's easy to say. And doing good quality work, that's easy to say. And then when you actually drill down on it, as Bowley did then, and I might see perhaps if we could even reach out and see if he's happy to share that. I know that was an in-house thing, but he might be happy to actually get a copy, and this might be something you could share with this group, you know, another occasion. So that just reinforces to me that, you know, that's where excellence comes from, is that attention to detail and that persistence. So, you know, principles there, it's not rocket science, but, you know, easy to say, harder to do, but yeah, that was really, as I said, exceptional.
Well, thanks, David. I'm going to head back to Gary in a moment, but mate, thank you very much for giving up your time this morning, particularly in the middle of plumbers and electricians and builders and dogs and all the other things that you're dealing with at the moment. Really appreciate you sharing a lifetime of expertise working with some of the best
I just had
coaches in
a delivery
the world.
person come in with innovative plumbing solutions. So it's all happening.
Mate, if I know you, you'll probably test them. You'll probably do an analysis. You'll be sitting there with a video and giving a report within an hour on their performance of installing the plumbing. So nature of the beast. So look, thank you very much again, mate. I'll hand back to Gary. If you'd like to wrap up.
Thanks very much, Wayne. David, I echo everything Wayne said there. Thank you very much for giving us your time this morning. I know for a lot of the coaches on this call, that it's quite an enlightening insight into the detail that you've been the master of for some time now. So thank you very much again. Wayne, I'm not sure what the information is that has gone out regarding the next small group meetings. I'm a little bit behind with that in terms of where Amanda has set that. Does everybody already know when the next time that they'll be meeting, Wayne? I think he's frozen. All right. Well, anyway, not to worry about that. Really good turnout today, guys. I think we've got everyone in the TED group. We've got several people from the talent group. Some really good questions already. I hope David doesn't mind me saying this, but I think there was definitely at least one extra question from Max and a couple of other people. Guys, David's invited you to email him. Please do so, and I'm sure he'll get back to you when he has some time. And let's keep this discussion going the next time we meet. I'll make sure that the information around the next small group meetings gets sent out, and just keep yourselves aware of what's happening. I've recorded this meeting. I will get that set up and put out on the Facebook so that it's available for you. Okay. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the week. I'll see some of you at the weekend, the meet here, and I'll catch up with the rest of you before Christmas. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.